disappointment. But she shook away a frown and returned to her gleeful self. "I guess someone found this place before you," she giggled as she began reading the letter out loud. "Dear Sandra, you wouldn't believe a place like this could exist, undiscovered and hidden from the rest of civilization. It's so beautiful, a secret Garden of Eden. And the best part is that I just found it on accident. I bought you this balloon for your birthday. I wanted to tell you in person that I love you, but I guess I'm a coward. I realized we haven't told each other that yet, but I figured it would fit better here, by the clear crystal lake and the wonderful wildlife, especially the ducks. But I can't leave. There'll be excellent food for the bleeding tree. I know how much you like ducks, but when I found this place, the tree was dying, and it wasn't strong enough to consume me. But if I feed it the ducks, the rabbits, whatever other wildlife inhabits this area, I can finally merge with it and become one with the forest. I wish I could have taken you here, but I've already planted the seed within me, and if I leave, the seed will die. I'll attach this letter to the balloon and hope it finds you. Maybe you can come here and join me. The bleeding tree needs our flesh to live. Love, Jack." Jen handed me the letter, with a confused look on her face. Um, I think I must have misread something. That didn't really make any sense." I took the letter and skimmed over it. The handwriting was fairly unintelligible from the get-go, but it only got worse as it went on, and my dyslexic eyes could hardly decipher it. Jen had always been the one to translate doctor's notes and anything written in cursive. Despite my slow deciphering, it seemed correct. The bleeding tree needs our flesh to live. That's unsettling. Have you ever heard about the bleeding tree? I asked. Our town had quite a few legends, urban tales, and various myths, but nothing like this. Jen shook her head, still looking confused and mildly worried. "It's probably a prank, right?" she asked. Yeah, yeah, it has to be. What else?" I said, before pointing to the balloon. "And these helium balloons deflate after like a day, right? So someone had to have put it there recently." "Sure, but why?" She had a point. In the most secluded forest in our area, a place that seemed untouched by mankind, why would anyone plant a balloon with a fake note? Unless they followed me. And even then, who would wander for hours just to prank someone? "How about we just eat?" I asked. "I'm sure the balloon got caught in the wind or something, then somehow ended up stuck under this tree. Probably wasn't even meant for us, right?" She nodded, and we decided to prepare our picnic date. We started with the sandwiches and salad, and I decided to keep the wine a secret until the end of the date, where I'd pour a glass at sunset and propose with a ring, before we fell asleep under the stars. We ate, talked about a future we could only dream about, full of travel, adventures, free from traditional work and adult responsibilities, made futile plans about how we could make enough money to disappear off the face of the earth for a few years. We were dreamers, but that's how we liked it. Always talking about impossible things, some not even remotely grounded in reality. Jen took a knife out of our picnic basket and decided we should write our initials into the tree, to be remembered for the next few decades. "Do you want to do it?" she asked. I grabbed the knife and cut in R plus J. I lay down on the ground and stared up at the tree above. There was a small hole in the otherwise continuous ceiling of leaves, and beyond it, hung a brilliant blue sky, an infinite cover for the secrets of the universe. My mind wandered, and I pondered all the possibilities of the world, which triggered a conversation we'd had 1,000 times before. Wouldn't it be cool if we could just live forever? I said, rhetorically, not expecting an answer. You don't want to live forever, Jen responded, as if it were a fact. Well, maybe not forever, but imagine a couple of 1,000 years to explore. Trust me, you'll get bored. You can't even finish a movie in one sitting. That's different. I wouldn't get bored of this. Honestly, I could do this until the end of time, I argued. It's not different. An eternity is by definition boring. Imagine having solved all the mysteries in the world, having thought every possible thought, seen every part of every planet. What do you do next? So, you wouldn't want more time? Nope. Life is beautiful exactly because it's fleeting. It could vanish in a second, meaning we're forced to enjoy it as much as we can. Infinite life would just let us procrastinate finding happiness forever. The discussion went on like that for a while, like it had before, and like it most likely would in the future. As we finished up the salad, I scanned around for the patch of freshly dug dirt, thinking I should start planning the next stage in our date. To my surprise, there were no disturbed parts of the ground. Everything had been grown over, seemingly untouched. I'd lost my secret hiding spot, and panic started to rise in my blood. You are right. You look a bit worried, Jen asked. Yeah, I just. I'm going to go for a little walk, digest all the food and all. Want to come with? Nah, I think I'll just lie here and write, she responded. Jen pulled out her journal and started writing about her day. She always preferred to relax after a meal, but I had to think, and thought that maybe I could remember where I put the stash if I walked around the area. But I needed to be subtle. It was an oddly quiet afternoon, and though the sun stood high up in the sky, it was almost cold. That, in addition to the lack of animals surrounding the lake, felt wrong. I pulled out the letter again and read over the part about the lake being filled with ducks and about animals that surrounded it. Animals that would feed the bleeding tree. Then I saw something that contrasted starkly with the clear water and the smooth rocks beneath it, shattering the monotonous glimmer. Something white, long sticks littering the lake floor. They were bones. From what I could tell, they mostly seemed like birds' rib cages, maybe some foxes or other small animals, but a few larger, too large to come from any animal that lived in the forest. I took off my shoes to wade in the shallow water, picking up the largest one. A femur, based on what I could tell, almost looked like it belonged to a human being. Oh my god! I heard Jen yell from the tree. I ran over, not understanding what she was yelling about, until I stepped in something wet just next to the tree. I looked down at my feet to see a crimson liquid seeping up between my toes. What the hell? I said, realizing all too late I was standing in a pool of blood. There, she stuttered as she pointed at the tree we'd had our picnic beneath. A pool of dirty blood had gathered around the tree in my absence. The bark where we'd etched in our names had fallen off, and blood emerged from the hole. It was bleeding profusely, bright red liquid flowing out from the tree and mixing with the mud below. What the hell? Is the tree? I trailed off. It can't be blood. It has to be something else. Jen picked up a long stick and started prodding the bleeding hole. Jen, don't. That's disgusting, I said, but she'd already shoved the stick deeper into it. The entire tree twitched in reaction, as if filled with muscles, all contracting, trying to avoid the pain of being cut. Jen stepped back in shock, but quickly prodded the tree again to confirm we hadn't just gone crazy. Her second prod caused a larger chunk of bark to fall off the tree, revealing pulsating, red flesh beneath it. Let's get out of... I tried to say, but was interrupted by the tree starting to violently shake, pulling up flesh-covered roots from the dirt, causing the ground beneath us to shatter into pieces. Within a second, a large cap formed under our feet, causing us to crash into a pitch-black hole below. As we tumbled, we reached out our hands for each other, but with no control, we could only hope to soften the blow. But instead of landing safely, I hit my head on a rock sticking out from the wall. Then I passed out. Once I finally awoke again, it felt like hours had passed. It had turned pitch black in the time I was out, and the only thing letting me know that I hadn't died was the sound of Jen moaning somewhere next to me. I fumbled around for my phone. It had fallen out of my pocket and landed in another pool of blood. I checked myself to see if I was the one bleeding, but apart from what must have been a mild concussion, I was unscathed. The phone still worked, and even without any service, it still functioned as a weak flashlight. I dimly lit up the surrounding cave and revealed a ceiling of dirt and meat above me. It wasn't night. There simply wasn't a sky to light up anything. Jen lay up against the wall, passed out from the fall. I shined my light at her and almost dropped my phone in shock. She'd been gutted by a sharp root sticking out from the ground, perforating straight through her abdomen. Jen, please, please wake up, I cried as I gently shook her, careful not to worsen her injury. She slowly opened her eyes and yelped in pain. What happened? She asked. Just lie still, Jen. We fell into the ground. You're hurt. She moved her arms and quickly realized there was a branch sticking out from her belly. Oh my God, get it out. Please, get it out, she cried as she tried pulling at the root. It twitched violently in response, putting Jen into further agony. Jen, you gotta keep still, please. If you move, you'll only make it worse. But it hurts. It hurts so much, she groaned. I know, but please don't. I, I'm going to find help. We're going to get you out of here. I promise. Just stay still. She grabbed my hands as I tried to stand up. Wait, don't leave. I don't want to be alone. I'm not leaving you. I just need to look for a way out. I swung the flashlight around the cave, checking for any hole in the ceiling, any possible way we could have fallen in. But the only way seemed to extend deeper into the ground, a small tunnel digging further into the darkness. The entire ground felt muddy, in a mixture between dirt, blood, and the occasional fleshy root sticking up, wriggling around as it looked for us. Each root bled, adding to the pool that slowly filled the cave. Jen, there's no way to climb out of here. I have to check out the tunnel, I said. No, stay. It's not so bad. It's nice. Stay together, she mumbled, drifting in and out of consciousness, delirious from blood loss. I'm sorry, Jen. I have to find help, I said, kissing her on the forehead one last time. I lay down and started to slowly wriggle my way through the dark tunnel. For each inch I moved, I felt another root reach out, trying to grab me. Something white stuck out from the wall ahead, a fractured bone, sharp enough to cut through my flesh as I moved past it. I yelped quietly in pain, feeling warm blood trickling down my arm. As I bled, the root seemed to extend towards me, desperately trying to grab a hold of my newly formed wound, digging themselves inside. The pain was unbearable, but I pulled them out before they got a chance to fester. The cave opened up into a larger cavern, my weak flashlight doing little to illuminate it. I stood up slowly, almost tripping over while entering, as my foot got caught on something stuck to the ground. It was an arm, half buried in the ground, half digested by its surroundings, only a few pieces of fat and muscle still attached. There were hundreds of mangled bodies scattered around the cavern, alongside various personal effects: phones, glasses, shoes, clothes, backpacks. A flashlight lay next to one of the less digested bodies, beside a wallet and something more familiar: a bottle of wine and a ring box. It was the casket I'd buried in preparation for the date. It had fallen down and shattered on a rock, spilling its contents. I pocketed the ring and picked up the flashlight. The wallet lay open on the ground, and I caught a glimpse of the name on the driver's license. It belonged to Jack Geller. Perhaps it was even the one who wrote the letter we'd found earlier. There was another piece of paper inside the wallet, covered in the same illegible handwriting as before. Dear Sandra, I know this letter won't reach you, because I'm already joined with the bleeding tree, slowly becoming one with the eternal forest above. I wish you were here with me to comfort me through the pain. I hope it ends soon, but if not, well, each root in this place is made from a different person. Travelers that got lost in the woods, that have become integrated with the hive mind, and very soon, I'll be one of them too. I can already hear their thoughts. Only whispers, but they're getting louder. Soon I'll know what they're saying. Even now, as I write. Oh God, no. This isn't what I wanted. Please no, don't. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. His letter ended abruptly with scribbles making no sense. I checked around, among his other possessions. I found a knife and a small shovel. Then it dawned on me that he hadn't fallen into a trap like we had, but instead, he'd actively dug his way down, looking for a route to join him with the tree. If he could get in, then maybe we could get out. I grabbed his belongings and started crawling back, once more cutting myself on the bone, unable to avoid it. I didn't care about the wounds. I was determined to get Jen out of there, to bring her back safely, even if it killed me. Jen had awoken by the time I returned, but the root had grown in size, wrapping around, splitting up into smaller tendrils that actively dug into her chest, even bulging through her skin. I bent down, ready to cut away the fleshy roots, but she grabbed my hand before I could start. She stared into my eyes, pleading for me to stop what I was about to do. Jen, come on. I know it'll hurt, but I have to cut you loose, I said, tears welling up in my eyes. She just looked back at me, and I could see the pain she was suffering from. I pulled out the little box I'd hidden in my pocket and opened it, revealing the ring. I I was going to, but I sobbed, unable to bring out the words I'd practiced for so long before our anniversary. I just hoped she'd understand it and be distracted enough so I could cut the roots. Then she finally spoke. It's nice here. What? Stay with me. Let's just stay here, she said, her voice tired and completely rid of any emotion. Tears ran down my face, but she no longer cared. She wouldn't let me free her. You'll die if you stay here. Jen, please, I begged. No, nothing dies here. Nothing is allowed to. She smiled, revealing tiny roots extending from her mouth. The tree had completely filled her. Even if I tried to cut her free, she'd still be riddled with the things. No, 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 no. I'm getting you the hell out of here, I yelled. I held her arms down and lifted my knife against one of the roots. It was surprisingly sharp, considering how old it looked. It easily cut through one of the smaller roots, penetrating Jen's chest. She writhed in agony as the connection severed, blood spurting out of the stump of the root, a hollow tube sticking into her chest. It was her blood. She had become so intertwined with the tree that killing the roots meant taking Jen with it. Jen's smile vanished, and she started crying. Why are you hurting me? Stop it. I don't want to die. I don't want to, she sobbed. Then I did something I'll regret to the end of my days. I had the choice between killing the love of my life or letting her become one with the bleeding tree. Maybe I'm weak. Maybe I'm a coward. But I couldn't take a life. I just couldn't. So, instead, I took the shovel and started digging. I left Jen alone in the dark while I fought for my freedom. For each inch of dirt I removed, more roots, tendrils revealed themselves, reaching out in an attempt at digging themselves into my bleeding flesh. Another bone, another cut, but I kept going, digging with my spade and cutting with a knife, desperate to see the sunlight once more. I can't say for sure what happened next. It's all hazy, in a mixture between blood loss and adrenaline surging through my veins. But I remember hitting through the dirt, a ray of moonlight greeting me on the surface, and minutes of crawling away from the bleeding tree to safety. Despite my severe injuries, I made it to my feet, continuously bleeding as I limped my way towards the car. I dropped my phone somewhere while digging, and only had the moon to guide me through the dark, silent forest. Everything seemed grey in the lack of light. And then, at some point along my escape, I collapsed. That was 2 months ago. Since then, I've been in the hospital, in and out of a coma. The doctors tell me I suffered septic shock, apparently a reoccurring infection keeping me at bay until last week, when I finally awoke. They called it a miracle, but it doesn't feel like one. I left the cave to find help, to stop the tree from consuming Jen. But by now, her flesh has been torn from her bones, and I can only imagine she's one with it, to suffer for all eternity. I couldn't save her from an eternity of pain. It's my fault. This is my goodbye. No one should suffer the same fate Jen did, and yet I'm going back. I should have killed her before she got consumed by the roots. But now, I can do nothing more than to join her. I'm going back. At least she won't have to suffer alone. Our sister's suicide affected not only our family, but the entire community in which we lived. She was beloved by nearly everyone. Wherever she went, she left an impression of kindness and comfort. Our town mourned, communally, over the death of Elise. She had a personal philosophy she followed, which essentially stated that life was amazing, an incredible phenomenon made even more wonderful by its ability to self-replicate and alter its own environment to facilitate further reproduction. She was forever awestruck by something we, as a species, consider so commonplace: our own existence. My younger brother was somewhat the opposite. In fact, they'd argue fairly often, her humanitarian views clashing against his sometimes outright misanthropic beliefs. They'd wage moral and ethical wars in the living room of our home, flinging insults and spewing rhetoric, never convincing each other. It was entertaining for a while. Then, last week, things turned sour, and their last debate ended abruptly. Before, they had been heated and energetic, both siblings orated dramatically, gesturing as if speaking before a greater audience, when I was the only one watching. They still retained a fundamental respect for each other, and despite the shouted insults and profane gestures, they never spoke over each other or became physically confrontational. Last week's debate started the same as they always had. My brother burst into the room to relate some new observation that he thought proved, without a doubt, that humanity as a whole was inherently and irreparably flawed, unremarkable in the scope of the cosmos, and deserving of no greater consideration than that of any other material object in the universe. His observations and the basis of that particular argument was compelling. I'll give him that. He said that he had witnessed a man leer at a woman while waiting in a line at the grocery store. The man had been with his family, a wife and 2 children. The woman was alone, obviously dressed for a night out. The man's gaze settled on the woman's body long enough for his child, a boy of about 10, to notice, and presumably old enough to understand what his father's stare suggested. The boy had poked his dad, playfully admonishing him against staring, and the father swiftly struck the boy in the face. No one had noticed. My brother said the strike alone was enough to condemn the man, but what unsettled him more was that the boy reacted almost robotically, as if the behavior was something to which he had been accustomed. He turned his head away from his father and stared on, eyes peering emotionless into his mother's back, who hadn't seen anything. The sister, who had seen all that occurred, simply ignored it, as if she too were accustomed to her father's violence. Elise had listened quietly, preparing her rebuttal internally and giving Sean a chance to provide his supplemental argument and any personal additions he felt necessary. When he had finally finished, she stood, with a reserved grace that I had only seen her exhibit during formal occasions, and said, "No, people are merely forms of life, not the essence of it. One man does not represent the concept of life, and his actions were not born of some maliciousness inherent to life. Life is still good by virtue of what it is, and what it isn't." Elise, though certainly an intelligent girl, especially for a 17-year-old, had never spoken so philosophically, or specifically separated the concept of life from its human representation. Before, She always spoke of people and life synonymously, ascribing intrinsic goodness to both. After her intended refutation, she left the room, leaving my brother and I equally dumbfounded. Elise was never one to simply leave an argument so soon, especially after providing such a relatively short-winded counter. I said that she was perhaps tired. She ran track after school, and their arguments usually took place after she arrived home, and to leave her alone for the night. Sean, visibly disappointed by the lack of a real fight, yet understanding of how unusual such behavior was for our sister, left to go spend time with his friends. After he left, I visited my sister in her room, where I found her sitting on a bed, staring out her window. There had been fast winds that day, and the lone tree in our front yard swayed slightly, while its leaves rattled as if it was shivering. Elise had changed from her track attire to a white t-shirt and grey sweatpants, and had undone a ponytail, letting her dirty blonde hair fall carelessly around her shoulders. "I know how to make him see." She had spoken so softly. I asked her to repeat her words, and when she did, louder, there was an acutely grave suggestion to her tone. "I know how to make him see. I figured it out, Isaac. How to prove once and for all that life, in its true nature, is good, is holy." We weren't a religious family. Our parents had never taken us to church, and we hadn't felt any compulsion to seek spiritual education. I wouldn't say we're a family of science, but we definitely prefer a more straightforward, empirical approach to what is and isn't present within our universe. So her words were shocking, to say the least. "What do you mean, holy?" I tried to speak calmly, because something about her expression, which had changed from distant, almost forlorn, to a little excited, had unnerved me. Her eyes were wide, her forehead creased, and her body stiff, as if in anticipation of something of which only she had been aware. Perhaps sacred is a better word. I don't mean to suggest any mundane religious connotations. I'm not talking about divinity as applied to your average man conceived belief system. Life is good, sacred, fascinating, because of its power. Life brings about change of everything. Life is the only force, the only energy that cannot be dissipated, dispersed, or disrupted if the form life takes is persistent enough. Her words were nonsense to me, and her agitation grew until she had sat perched on the edge of her bed, kicking back and forth rapidly. I don't think she was even aware of the physical manifestations of her excitation. "Elise, you're tired. You should get some sleep." She cocked her head at that, as if I'd said something humorously naive. "The will, Isaac. I speak of the will. That spiritual engine which drives us to survive, to propagate as a species, to persist. People believe that emotions like grief, anger, or regret can make a person survive, partially after death, in spectral form. They believe that if something is felt enough, just before death, the feeling can stall a person's annihilation, allowing them to subsist amidst the shadows as ghosts, spirits, wraiths, etc. It's all nonsense." Her voice grew louder, her expression crazed, her physicality manic. "Delusions, all of it, but the will, it's different. It is the amalgamation of all those things, combined with something deeper, something baser. Most people have feeble, unremarkable wills. When they die, so too dies their will to reject death, to sustain life. They accept their invitation to oblivion. Those with strong, powerful wills Those revenants who return to life, regardless of the physical, mortal trauma they have suffered, those are the true divines. They are the best representations of life and its beauty. I was speechless. As a 15-year-old with zero experience in such a weighty topic, incapable of participating in any sort of debate or discussion with her. When I did not respond, she nodded her head and smiled, as if I had expressed in some way my agreement with her deranged oration. I will show you how strong my will is, Isaac. I'll show you right now. She removed a knife from under a pillow, one of Dad's expensive kitchen set, and brought the tip to her throat and said, "See you in a bit." Then sank the blade just under her chin. She let out a sort of yelp and then choking sounds as she pressed the blade deeper. She had almost gone to the handle, and all the while staring at me, placidly, when she said her last words. "I will be remade." She then died, with both hands grasping the handle of the knife, the blade fully plunged into her throat. A wide red streak had fallen from the wound and down her shirt, a single torrent of crimson that pooled silently on the wooden floor. I stood there, unsure as to what had happened. When I first started to process things, I started screaming. And that's how my brother found me 2 hours later. He said our sister's eyes were still open, even then, fixed in a lunatic's gaze, as if she was still alive, staring into something beyond her perception. We buried her 3 days later. My parents didn't talk to us much while Elise had been alive. They both worked together in some pharmaceutical corporation and rarely had time to do family things. They were attentive enough, but still distant. After Elise's suicide, it was as if they lived somewhere else. I rarely saw them after the first few days following her burial, and when I did, it was only in passing, as if we were acquaintances, offering unenthused gestures of recognition on the street. They behaved furtively, as if they knew something about Elise that I didn't. When I could not extract answers from them, I investigated her room. I won't disgrace her memory by sharing any of the uniquely personal items I found. The only relative discovery was a series of medical documents dated a few weeks earlier, all intended for Elise. They detailed the results of a series of tests performed over the last few weeks, all of which indicated, without question, that Elise had a tumor on her brain. Her symptoms, some of which she had apparently described, others which were detected, listed such things as lightheadedness, blurred vision, hallucinations, and, on one occasion, seizure. I wasn't aware of any of this. I thought I had understood then. Her pre-suicide ranting had been the combined result of stress, a fear of death, and its permanence, and the warped thoughts of someone whose brain was being corrupted by a malignant tumor. It all made sense under that context. That tore me apart. That her last moments had been expressed through a filter of mild insanity. My sadness was replaced with fear when I began to hear her voice in my head. "Isaac, I told you I'd return. My will has beaten back death. I live." I first heard her while mindlessly watching TV, thinking about nothing. I didn't even need to look around. I knew that her voice had originated within my mind, not from somewhere within the room or somewhere else in the house. She continued to sit with me after that, excitedly, constantly, never letting me have a minute of peace. She wasn't angry or hateful or anything that would have suggested she was vengeful towards her brother, who had failed to save her, who had simply screamed and screamed for hours. But she wasn't kind either. Before, during her arguments with my brother, she would allow him as much time to speak as he wanted. But in my head, she went on and on, stepping over my thoughts, silencing my inner voice for hours while she expounded about her experience, quote, beyond the bounds of mortality. It was dreadful, nightmarish stuff. But she spoke of it almost lovingly. I started getting headaches. The more she spoke, the longer she took control of my cognition, the more she made me think and perceive as she would have. I went to the doctor, and after a series of tests, was told that I had a tumor growing in my brain. I asked Elise about it, and she said that my will was weak, and perhaps she could make better use of my body once I'd vacated it. She spoke softly, kindly, as a nurse would a moribund patient. I told her that maybe the tumor that was in her brain was a part of her, that her will, regardless of the body, was corruptive, that she was inherently bad. She stopped talking after that, but I can still feel her in me. I think she's just waiting for me to die. I don't hate her. I don't think she's evil. But I do think she's wrong about life. Wrong that it's good, just because it has the potential to surmount all adversity, survive all conditions. I won't let her have my body. She didn't want to be consumed by her tumor, wouldn't accept that kind of death. I won't either. It began slowly, innocuously, although the first appearance was quite sudden. There was no warning, no dent. It was just there, as if the small little hole had always belonged on my calf, as though it had always been there and always would. I first noticed it, and, after a quick moment's inspection, I thought that I should visit the doctor soon. Then, I went about my day, and it promptly left my mind. The next time I noticed it, I chided myself for not making an appointment, and once more thought to do so. However, this time, it seemed fascinating, sickeningly so. On the outside of my left calf was this small, although rather too large, hole. It was perfectly circular and completely black. It was as if no light could penetrate it. I studied it for hours, twisting this way and that, trying to see if there were more. I even used a torch to try and find what the cause was. The hole was too deep to see completely into. What I could see was regular looking skin, and the rest faded into shadow. There was no redness, no swelling, and no pain. Once I had satisfied my morbid curiosity, I I went to the phone to call the doctor, but on my way, it slipped my mind. One moment I was striding confidently, if a little panicky, towards the phone. The next, I stopped, paused, and wondered who I was going to ring. It seemed every time I saw it, I immediately remembered, but once it was out of my sight, it left my mind. This went on for a few days. Then another began to appear. I could see a small dent, perfectly circular, and watched as over a few hours it deepened. It happened imperceptibly. I was only aware of it if I looked away and back again. But curiously, each time I looked away, I momentarily forgot what I was looking at. They were completely erased from my mind. I can think of numerous times I glanced at my calf and saw nothing but smooth, slightly hairy skin. It was a week before I noticed them again. This time, there were 7. They had taken on a slightly honeycombed shape. Thin walls of skin separated each one. I used a magnifying glass, but could not discern their cause. The only thing I was sure of was that they were there, and they were not paws. When I next saw them, I was shocked and horrified. I counted 15, and what appeared to be 3 more. Their overall honeycomb shape became more apparent. I stared at them for hours, moving this way and that, seeing how they would react. They seemed to compress slightly if I stood, as though, weakened, they could no longer support my weight. I went to bed, troubled, but unsure of what. I had written down, "Call a doctor about your calf now," on a piece of paper. But when I looked at it again, the writing was scribbled out, obscured by thick, black marks. When I awoke the next morning, I felt a strange sensation in my calf. Swinging out of bed, I glanced at the sheet and saw a strange, yellowish liquid that had soaked into the sheet where my calf had rested. This residue seemed sticky, almost mucousy. The area around the holes had a sheen, and the skin was also coated. Counting, I found 34. I tried not to gag at the sight. The sensation returned, more uncomfortable than before. Quickly, I grabbed the flashlight and tried to see what it was, but I still could not penetrate the depths of those damn holes. Quickly, I looked for something, anything that was thin and long. I noticed that as I walked, my left leg seemed to sink slightly as my weight was put on it, like a spring under pressure. Finding a thin needle, I carefully pushed into one of the holes, slowly so as to not accidentally stab myself. It went deeper. The golden yellow liquid oozed around it, becoming thicker and faster flowing the deeper the needle went. Finally, it stopped. However, I could not feel the tip. I could feel the sides of the needle, but nothing else. I pushed it further and felt something writhing. Slowly, ever so slowly, I pulled the needle from my flesh, dragging more of that disgusting goo with it. A slight smell of rotting fruit filled the air, vile, but with a sweetness to it. As the needlehead left my flesh, I retched and vomited. On the end of the needle was a small, black worm, wriggling as it died. As I watched the creature that had lived in my leg squirm, I realized what the sensation was. It was coming from each and every one of those holes. Something was inside each one. Something was squirming in each one. Something was burrowing deeper in each one. Shudders pulsated through my body as I tried not to vomit again. I stared at that tiny, dying creature, unable to look away. There was no time to think, only to act. I made my way to the kitchen and, grabbing a sharp knife, sat down and set to work. First, I cut through the tiny pockets of skin, allowing the holes to become one. Then, I dug out each and every one of the vile creatures. The deeper I dug, the more I found. Blood had begun to flow freely and fill the hole I had created. I limped to the bathroom, barely able to walk. As I sat on the side of the tub, I grabbed the hose. I could feel them inside me. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, all gorging. Turning on the water, I rinsed the wound clean, clearing my field of vision. As the blood cleared, I saw them, a writhing mass living inside me. Occasionally, one would fall from the group and, squirming, would be washed down the drain. At first, I used a knife to try and remove them, then my fingers. I felt something sharp bite into my hand. One of them had attached themselves to the tip of my index finger. With a shout of horror, I cut it away from my flesh. I carefully cut until I found tissue. Then I began to saw, hacking away, trying to remove as much as I could. Clumps of those insidious things fell from my leg. My vision grew cloudy, and shooting stars of red and black flashed across my eyes. I knew I was going to pass out soon, and still I tried to work, faster and faster, trying to finish the horrific job. I remember breathing deeply, then darkness. I awoke in the hospital. An untold amount of time had passed. The delivery man had looked inside my window to see if I was home and had seen a trail of blood. He had called the police. I tried to explain my actions to the doctors. They didn't understand. There was no trace of those creatures, but I can still feel them. I can feel them advancing, burrowing deeper and deeper, gorging on my flesh, thriving in my warm body. Soon, they will burst forth. I will have to stop them. Somehow, I will. My mother died when I was 12 years old. It was the single most traumatic experience of my life, and I'd be lying if I said I've gotten over it. But that isn't what has affected me most lately. Whenever a parent dies, most people just talk about the death itself. There's a lot of how and when, but not a lot of then what happened. It is that lasting legacy of what happens afterwards that really marks you for life. As my dad had to pick up extra hours to make ends meet, I had to help take care of my sisters. At that age, I barely made my own bed. Now I had to cook and bug my sisters about taking their showers. My younger sisters were far more depressed than I was. I didn't have time to be depressed. I had stuff to do. So now, as an adult, I can kind of see that I got stuck in that rut. I'm still taking care of people. Maybe I'm afraid of what'll happen if I stop. Originally, I wanted to be a doctor. but we just couldn't afford that kind of education. I considered studying abroad, but my sisters still needed me long into their teenage years. Instead, I studied to become a nurse, which was the cheaper option. No less work though, just slightly cheaper. Once my sisters and I moved out, I got my own place, and I bounced around various hospitals and nursery homes around the state. I've worked at a rehab clinic, an open clinic, and as an in-home nurse. All kinds of positions. I had 8 different jobs all in all, changing back and forth between them as one closed and another opened. But it wasn't until a few years ago that I saw an opportunity for a stable job. The biggest hospital in my home area had an opening for a nurse in the maternity ward. Well, I hadn't worked there before. I knew most of the procedures around the LDR rooms and the NICU unit. Sorry, I'll stop with the abbreviations. I got my interview just days after the wanted ad went up. I was called in to talk with 2 of the nurses and one of the doctors. I could tell it was sort of rushed, and it all seemed like a bit of a formality. By the way they acted, I figured they could really use the help right away, especially Dr. Gellen, who never even sat down. She was asking me questions while still pacing around the room. Surprise, surprise, I got the job. Starting Monday, the following week, I got my first tour of the place. The first few weeks, I would mostly act as a helping hand while they figured out a more static position for me. In the meantime, I'd be moving from nurse to nurse, assisting them one by one. I didn't really have any responsibility of my own at first. The first few days I spent with Dr. Gellen, helping out in the LDR. I have pretty good bedside manners, and several expecting mothers were happy to have me distract them from whatever they were going through. I also had to run a few tests, sit in on ultrasounds, and help deliver some bad news. I don't want to go into details, but pregnancy isn't always this amazing, beautiful thing. After a few days, I helped out in the reception, then at the emergency room, and so on and so on. After about a month of working there, I'd been pretty much everywhere but the nursery. You know, the fancy room with the glass windows where newborns rest up. I'd seen it in passing once, but it was sort of off limits to newbies like me. There's a lot you must be aware of when working with someone that helpless. It was when I was assisting Nurse Rena that I finally took my first steps into the nursery. It was this large square room with several units lining the walls, well lit with cheerful colours. It was empty when we went in there, having been cleared out for a proper spring cleaning, so it was a bit eerie. "We usually have a half dozen or so in here at a time," said Rena. "A few more around August and September." I was a bit distracted. I kept hearing this strange noise. "You with me?" she asked. "What did I just say?" "Sorry," I sighed. "There's this noise." "There's going to be plenty of noise," she groaned. "You better get used to it." "No, it's like—" It was hard to describe. It seemed to come from the center of the room. Some sort of machine noise. A broken vent. "A thump. Some kind of machine," I continued. "Focus. What did I say?" "Ka-ka-ka-chunk. Ka-ka-ka-chunk. Ka-ka-ka-chunk." It was there. Somewhere in the middle of the room. But what was it? "Sorry," I smiled. "One more time." As we left the room, the noise stayed in the back of my mind. It felt familiar somehow. But from where? The following days, things were getting busy. About half the patients we received either had some sort of condition or were oddly particular about their care. One woman had a partner sing screaming some kind of poem, for example. They had to be escorted out of the room. Another woman refused to have a baby without a favorite plant on the bedside table. Never seen a blue sunflower before. Never saw the kid either, for that matter. I was still assisting Rena in the nursery, and I got the opportunity to spend some time alone in that room. Even days later, the sound persisted. It was low, more like a hum, but it was definitely there. Ka-ka-ka-chunk, ka-ka-ka-chunk. I thought it might be a heating issue, but I couldn't locate where it was coming from. I suspected the ceiling, but it had this strange echo to it that made it just as prominent near the floor. Strange. At one point, we had 5 kids in the nursery at the same time. Rena had the main responsibility, but she took me along every now and then just to quiz me and see how well I fared on my own. But now that there were little patients in there, she had no tolerance for mistakes or hesitation. One Friday night, as I was working the evening shift, I went into the nursery to roll out one of the children. Rena was already halfway down the hall, calling out to Dr. Gellen, so I had this short moment completely alone with all 5 kids. The lights were a bit dimmer, and at first I didn't notice anything, but after a few seconds I could hear that sound again. Ka-ka-ka-chunk, ka-ka-ka-chung, ka-ka-ka-chung. But there was something else. As I looked around the room, I could see all the kids breathing in sync with the sound, little chests heaving up and down. Ka-ka-ka-chung. I gently pushed one of the units, accidentally waking up my little patient. As she stirred, she let out a soft cry, and for a moment, my mind blanked. I was just standing there in the middle of the room, and it felt like I was about to do something, and the machine noise was louder than ever. The kids were stirring. Maybe they could hear it too. It started to bother me. I asked a whole bunch of staff about it, but no one seemed to have any idea of what I was even talking about. If anything, the nursery was the quietest room in the entire ward. It had to be. You don't want to wake the patients. So, when I started rambling about machine noises, they all sort of tuned out, even Dr. Gellen. Even after my time with Nurse Rena was up, I started coming back to the nursery every now and then, sometimes on my lunch break. I just stand there and listen, trying to find the source of the sound. That's actually how I got started on here. I even took to online. I started asking other medical professionals about what that noise could be, and no one had a clear idea. I tried recording it, but it just wouldn't stick. Also, it is generally frowned upon to stand with a cell phone in the nursery, recording what could be a video. Big no-no. I went back over and over again, and it actually landed me in a bit of trouble. I had a private meeting with Dr. Gellen, who tried their best to understand my strange fascination with the nursery. Finally, I had to agree to leave my phone in my locker. I didn't go back there for a long time, but it was inevitable. The nursery is somewhat central to the entire ward, and you have to actively avoid it to never pass it. One night, as I was passing the glass window, I stopped to listen. But that time, I had a good reason. There were 4 kids in there, and they were the first thing I heard, not the strange machine noise. The kids were crying, but they were crying in unison. Short bursts of screams. It was rhythmic in a way. I stopped to listen, and my mind immediately returned to the noise. I was sure that if I stepped inside, I'd hear the noise again. The kids, they were screaming in unison with the sound. I could feel it. And that was just the start. I could start feeling it even at home. I get frustrated whenever I heard my washing machine, as it was out of sync with the sound that haunted the back of my mind. Ka-ka-ka-chung, ka-ka-ka-chung. Every rhythmic noise I heard just seemed off by comparison. It bothered me just how stuck that sound was, and I still had no idea what it was. And where had I heard it before? It came to a point where I sat up all night, listening to a 4-hour recording of a construction site. Nothing sounded like that goddamn machine. Ka-ka-ka-chung. At the end of a particularly long shift, as I was changing into my ordinary clothes, I started to listen to the hum of a fluorescent light in the bathroom. I could almost hear the rhythm of the electricity, and right there, behind my eyelids, was that rhythmic thumping again. I held my breath and it felt like the sound was growing louder. I could feel my pulse going up. Why was I getting angry? Or was it fear? But it was real. The sound was real. The longer I closed my eyes, the clearer it was. With my eyes closed, I turned my head. The sound changed pitch. Ka-ka-ka-chung. There, a direction where it was louder than ever, loud enough to change the beat of my heart. It was coming from the nursery. God damn it. I slammed my locker shut and hurried out. I had to get to the bottom of this. The sound was so prominent that I could just close my eyes and it'd be there. It was beating in rhythm with my heart. Ka-ka-ka-chung. I didn't care about anyone seeing me. I had to find out what it was. As I burst into the nursery, the newborns woke up. There were 7 of them in total. One by one, they started screaming. A steady, rhythmic scream. How had no one noticed this? How was I the only one? Ka-ka-ka-chung, scream. Ka-ka-ka-chung, scream. It wasn't a pain scream, more like a chant. This primal, instinctual grunt scream, almost melancholic. The sound grew louder, and my chest was pounding harder and harder. I thought I was having a heart attack. My fingers were aching, like someone was slowly turning my nerves counterclockwise. I didn't even realize it at first, but I was screaming too, to the rhythm of the grinding machine. I closed my eyes as hard as I could, trying to force the sound out of my head. Instead, it became clearer, and there, in the dark of my closed eyes, I could finally see. It was a strange feeling, looking around the room with closed eyes. There were lines of beetles on the floor, reaching from the unit of every newborn to a spot in the middle of the room. It was clear as day, despite the darkness of my closed eyes. Black and grey beetles marching to the rhythm of the machine, carrying little globs of white. And in the middle of the room, there was the source of the noise. From the side, it didn't look like much. It was sort of a pipe with a faint yellow shine. It was about 3 feet wide, positioned in the center of the room. Line after line of beetles dove into it, the little globs of white falling out of their mouths. Despite my body screaming for me to get away, to get out, to take a breath, I had to look. With my eyes closed, I crawled forward. I looked down the pipe. It is strange not being able to close your eyes to make something go away. When you watch a scary movie, you can turn away. You can hide behind a pillow. But looking down that pipe, there was nothing I could do. I couldn't turn away, and my eyes were already closed. It's hard to describe. It was deep, impossibly deep. Somewhere miles below, there was a fire so bright that it burned my closed eyes. I could barely see it, shrouded behind hundreds of cogwheels, chains, live wires, and steam pipes. I just stared, watching the little beetles tumble over the edge, bumping against the absurd machinery. I could hear the little clicks and clacks of their shells as they struck the moving parts. Ka-ka-ka-chunk. Something was moving, something organic, something living. There were hands reaching towards me, hands getting burned on steaming pipes, getting mangled by cogwheels. But still, it kept coming upwards. I hadn't even realized that I'd stopped breathing. I'd held my breath for so long that I was getting lightheaded. I was being pulled away from the center of the room, away from the machine. Something pushed against my back, forcing air back into my lungs. There was a distant voice. 2 people were carrying me. My eyes opened, and I could see the nursery with my open eyes again. All 7 kids were lying on the floor, outside of their units. They were screaming at the top of their lungs, just like me. They heard it. I heard it. But somehow, I think they knew more about it than I did. I was carried away. They tried to get me to breathe again, but it was like my body forgot how to do it. It wasn't until I got a mask over my face, forcing air into my mouth, that I snapped back to reality. My heart was hammering away so fast and hard that my head hurt. I had no feeling in my hands, and both my feet had fallen asleep. My face was burning hot. Dr. Gellin was shining a light in my eyes, but it felt so far away. For a split second, I blinked, and there, in the darkness, I sensed something. It was a different shade of dark. It had followed me here. It was so impossibly tall, able to cross the room in just a few steps. As it reached for me, beetles tumbled onto my chest, little globs of white getting ripped from my chest. Then, nothing. I must have passed out. They say it was some kind of psychotic episode. Hyperventilation, seizures. It didn't look good. I could no longer be around the children, so they were going to have to either fire me or find somewhere else for me to go. It took me 2 days to recover, and I was so scared to close my eyes that they had to give me eye drops. My hands cramped from grasping the side of the bed, terrified of being picked up or pulled away in the middle of the night. At times, I could almost feel the little beetles crawling over me, picking globs of shining white out of me. Sometimes I felt the presence of something in the room. Even with closed eyes, I was scared to look. Some things can't be unseen. I was going to have a short interview with Dr. Gellin about the incident, but he was swamped that day. Instead, I got to talk to the chief physician, an older man who was a full head shorter than me. He asked me several questions about my medical history and my experience. It didn't really lead anywhere. That is, until we started rounding off the interview. As I read my social security number to him to make sure he had my insurance info, he stopped.